approve or deny it.
Some escaping. Oh, really?
Approve it. It's a God.
Came through.
Yeah, and we have to say yea or nay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hutchinson City Council meeting for Tuesday, November 26, 2019. Approve the council agenda. Any agenda additions or corrections?
Mayor and council, I'll ask that you remove item number 11. MnDOT still, I think, an update later, but we're still waiting for some final paperwork, final revisions from them. Probably won't get it till January.
I'll approve the agenda with that correction.
I'll second.
Motion by Mary, second by Sia to approve the agenda with corrections. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Invocation is by Living Waters Fellowship. Good evening.
Good evening. Lord, we just come before you. We want to thank you for this council. We pray, Lord, that you would grant them wisdom and discernment and discretion as they make the decisions that affect the citizens of Hutchinson. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Next is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Recognition of gifts, donations, and community service to the city. Does anybody have anything tonight?
No, but what about them Tiger Shark girls?
Outstanding.
Absolutely. Yay, girls.
I had one
Yeah,
thing.
go ahead, Steve.
The Hutchinson Community Foundation had their awards presentations this afternoon.
Oh, good.
And just a great variety of grants that they provided to different groups to make Hutchinson a better place to live. It was from parks to historic Hutch with the windows, to some of the schools, to some of the other social organizations or support organizations. So I think they gave out $40,000. Barry Anderson came down, Justice Anderson. He was one of the early board members when the foundation got started, and he gave a little bit about the history, and he joked that, you know, when he was on it, they didn't even have $40,000. So now they're able to start giving out some nice grants to help support different causes. So just a big shout out to the foundation and everybody that provides donations to them. So comes back to the community.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Mary, we do have a resolution under there, resolution number 15116, resolution accepting $9,000 donation from the Hutchinson Lion Club for the new equipment at West Lions Park.
Mayor and council, you may recall, I think it was maybe a couple months ago now, the Lions that approached us about a project, and we did receive. We are receiving, or they're proposing to give us that $9,000 contribution. This will go towards the project. I will note we did add a couple things to the project. That's the city will be contributing to. I think at least Chad had noted something on behalf of the city, so we are kicking in a portion of some of our funds to help expand some of the work that's going on at that project. And so that's what's in front of you tonight for consideration. So.
Would note, I did talk to Sarah because she was over at that event, and she said she'll send out an updated drawing of what it'll look like, you know, when they get that. But there are a couple of additional pieces that will be a part of the project.
Expansion of the swing, a couple other things too. Can't remember exactly right now off the top of my head.
Chad, did they run that by Benny to make sure?
I'll run it by him tonight.
Okay.
We'll get you the drawings. Seal of approval.
Stamp of approval.
motion to accept that resolution?
Mayor, before you do that, I would like to be excused from voting on this because of being an Alliance member, so.
Sure.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution 15116.
I'll second it. Motion by Mary, second by myself to approve with Dave abstaining. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Public comment, citizens addressing the council. If we have you on the agenda, I would like you to wait till we have that item on the agenda come up. Approval of minutes, regular meeting minutes of November 12th, 2019, and workshop of November 12th, 2019.
Motion to approve both of those?
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by Chad to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Consent agenda, this will be done with one motion unless somebody pulls something off for discussion. A is consideration for approval of the 2020 invocation schedule. B is consideration for approval of second annual holiday parade of lights on December 14th, 2019, and claims appropriation and contract payments.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Motion by Chad, second by Dave to approve. On favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. We have a public hearing at 6, but we'll move down to number 9, presentation by Lexi Ludowies, Gustavus Adolphus College student, on the turkey issue. Kind of appropriate, because, you know, Thanksgiving is what timing you have.
I know.
Hi, my name is Lexi. As you all know, I'm a sophomore studying at Gustavus in St. Peter, and I have lived in Hutchinson for over 15 years. I consider it my home, and I'm in a public discourse class, so I had to learn about a problem in our community, and I had to study it for the whole semester, and I had to come up with a solution that would work with the community. And so, of course, I had to pick the wild turkeys, you know? What else is there? I asked about, and people really wanted me to look into it. Today we're going to discuss what I've come to know about the problems that they cause, why they're around, and my solution for the turkeys. Now we'll talk about the problems. So on your handouts, you can see that the turkeys are carriers of a disease called histoplasmosis. And according to the Illinois Department of Public Health, histoplasmosis is one of the few diseases that is transmissible between birds and humans. It has no symptoms, but it is proven to cause blindness, and it spreads through the air because it comes from the fungus histoplasma, which lives in the bird excrement. And so the thing about this fungus is it doesn't show up for 2 years because it kind of builds up, so the longer that the birds are around, the greater your chances are of getting this disease. Another problem is that of the traffic concerns. In 2015, when this was brought up previously, that was a really big concern for the city council, and I talked about evacuating that part of town so that way the birds wouldn't be incentivized to get to more trafficked areas. Additionally, we have the problems of the harms they cause to community members through their property. I spoke with Glennie Slaminger earlier this semester, and she told me that at times the poop can be a lot. There's also property damage with the birds pecking at houses and gardens and vehicles. Additionally, one time a guy hit one of the birds, and he had a lot of damage to his pickup truck, and he couldn't get the passenger side door open, so that's another traffic concern. We also have to think about our city workers. Glennie Songer told me that the mailman is often bullied by the birds, and her husband have had to save him multiple times. Jack Hammett wrote about this in 2018, and it's quite the problem. Also, we have to think about our pizza delivery people. Like, I spoke with Caitlin Lesueur, and she works for Pizza Hut, and there are times where they won't deliver your pizza if there's birds in front of your house because they're very intimidated by them. Now we will talk about why are the birds here? As you might be aware, wild turkeys have a very rich history in America. They almost were our national bird, but they lost by one vote. They also are very important with this upcoming holiday that we have. And with this rich history, we had hunted the birds almost to the point of extinction, and we did hunt some species of turkeys to extinction, reaching its lowest point in the 19th century. But then in the mid-20th century, there was a nationwide revival project that was started. According to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, in 1976, we got 30 turkeys transplanted from Missouri and Pennsylvania over here. And as you can see, it's been very well. Like, and then as time has gone by, humans have, increased, and so have the birds, and so we have this natural interaction. Why are they in Hutchinson specifically? Well, the birds have been here for at least the past 36 years, according to Jan Bergstrom. She did an article about this in 2010, when she started noticing the birds eating from her bird feeders, and she talked about how it was the first time since she's lived in Hutchinson where they've started to really interact. And they kind of grew to a point where they needed intervention in 2015, where they came to the attention of the city council. And that was because the birds started to associate that particular area with food because they would eat from the bird feeders, and people would feed them, which isn't the best thing to do. Now that we've talked about why the birds are present and the problems that they're causing, I'm going to propose my solution. I propose that we trap the birds using a caged or net method. I think this will be better than our current method, which has the net guns, because the birds have adapted very well to the net gun. It has a very short range, so you have to get really close, and the birds have adapted because they recognize the police vehicle and they'll scatter, and so I think this will be better. I propose that we butcher the birds using the same method that we currently have in place for the birds caught with the nets, because this will kind of make sense, use as you already have, and I think it'll work out. Thank you for letting me speak today. To review, we talked about the harms the birds can cause to the health and well-being of community members. We also talked about why they're present and my solution to catch the birds using traps. Is there any questions I can answer?
So you're saying traps instead of
The
the
net.
nets?
Yeah.
Okay. Have any examples? We have our police chief here. He might be interested.
She was intently.
Turkey hunter.
And they are smart because.
They are really smart.
Because our chief has said, they know a cop car and they know a policeman too. So,
Yeah.
they take a hike.
Yeah. Well, the DNR, they do this really cool thing where they have a net that's suspended, so they will pour corn around, and then they are able to catch 25 turkeys at once because they'll just eat and stay there for a little bit, and then they'll drop the net, which is really cool.
Sure.
And then you can also use cages, which is really nice for transporting, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. Those are both good examples. Did you talk to the DNR at all?
I tried to get in contact with the DNR. It was not very successful.
Oh, good, we're not the only one that has it.
Just from the disease aspect, I thought that was interesting. A good reason to
To get rid of
thin
them.
them down, get rid of them.
Well, it'd be nice if you could do that, and get 15, 20 birds at one time. They wouldn't all fit in the police car cruiser though.
I have to take a few trips.
They have a SWAT truck for it.
Chief Gifferson, last time you did it, what was the count that they let the DNR let you guys get? Or,
We had permits, I believe it was up to 20 birds. At that time, I think they thought the population was somewhere around that 20 to 30 birds. So if we harvested 20 and left 10 for the people that enjoy them, that was thought to be acceptable. I would suggest that the population is greater than that now. And I've communicated with Ms. Louise earlier and indicated that we were going to try to do something after the season closed, And then I was very interested to hear what you had to say as well, so. We're gonna keep working on it, but it'll probably be sometime this winter, and probably bring in the USDA to help us out.
I did see, I was out for a walk and there was one turkey crossing in front of the road. And then just, there was a whole line and I just started filming it and they just kept coming past this one house and there was over 30 at that time, so.
I had a joke there for turkeys crossing the
Yeah,
road. but
I started-
I laughed and got in trouble, so. To myself.
You can do that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Arbuckle is here, so I will go down to new business here, accepting petition from Lakeview Lane Southwest residents to remove no parking school days, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. signs.
My name is Ricardo Allen Arbuckle, 515 Lakeview Lane, Southwest. Get my breath here. Back in November 12th, I had come to the board with the residents of Lakeview Lane, both south and north, would like the no parking signs removed on Lakeview Lane. It was asked if I had a petition at that time, and I said no. It was requested by the board, the mayor, to get a petition, which I did, and out of 19 homes, I had 19 signatures that all were in agreement to say yes, we'd like the signs removed from Lakeview Lane. I gave the original copy to the Melissa Stark office. I have a copy of it, and I would once again like you to discern that, make a decision, and let us know if that would be possible with that. If you have any questions, this is kind of black and white, how what resident to resident. I can stand up here for an hour and give replies to what people said, but that's a waste of everybody's time right now. If you'd like some samples, I could give that, but I do have a petition to action with 19 signatures from 19 residents, and I got them all this time.
That was included in our packet.
That was in the packet, yes.
So,
Yeah, everything went as is supposed to.
so before the signs went up, did you have students parking over there?
Yes, we did, and how we handled it, we never had the problem as other streets had, and I'm not going to speak for other streets. And here's an example from Rick Arbuckle. I seen a high school kid pull up in a pickup truck, and I went out there and I said, excuse me, I said, if you could you pass the word that I said, we have residents that put out trash cans not to park there. I said, we have residents, our trash is picked up on Wednesday, that when it's time to rake leaves into the curbs, they suck them up on Thursday. I said, if you see leaves, please don't park so people can get in. And 3 high school vehicles that parked there all listened to that and moved elsewhere in spots, but we never had the overflow of parking with, as everybody knows, what had happened around the high school during that time. But as far as Lakeview Lane, we never saw that. We weren't overpopulated with the vehicle because truthfully the young high school students were trying to get as close as they could to the high school, which were close, but over there is closer. And we understand it as people now. I did talk to a lot of people. There were high school kids that cheated on the driveways, moving in on them. They were causing trash not to be picked up, and there was an issue. But as far as Lakeview Lane, we didn't have that issue. We went out there personally and talked to them, and to be honest with you, they were all courteous, very polite, and never gave us any grief, if you want to call that, or any attitudes or anything like that. They actually just moved across the spots where it never interfered with anybody. So that was the 12th I brought it. I got the petition. I did get the 19 out of 19 on the whole street. There's actually one resident that's on Skull Road. His north side of his house is on Lakeview Lane, but I did not get him because he's not on Lakeview Lane address. But we did talk about that because he did park out there at times. So.
Mayor and council, we've had, I think, at least one other successful petition. We might have two of them that didn't have a majority. So we have done a precedent in the past with it. I guess from staff's perspective, what we'd be looking the council to do tonight would be to, I guess, formally accept that petition, which would then result in us drafting a resolution to have those removed. We have that for your next council meeting in December, and you can probably have them removed middle of December or so. For John, sorry.
Yeah, and just so you know, we could remove them during the winter. Obviously, the posts themselves would not be removed, but the signs would be. And we'd remove the sign posts as soon as it was feasible in the spring, so.
Motion to accept the petition.
I'll second.
Motion by Steve, second by Mary to accept the petition. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. I know you're busy folks with everything that you do. The people at Lakeview Lane say thank you. And if the city needs help removing them, you have plenty of people and tools right now.
You have 5 minutes.
First reading of ordinance number 19-809, ordinance regulating transit merchant peddlers and food vendors. Mark, is this you?
It is, Mr. Mayor and council members. We had a slight discussion the last meeting about this combined ordinance, and there was just one little change that needed to be made about the Hutchinson Mall. That being an exception, and that was corrected. And primarily, last time we discussed about what type of fee should be assigned. Included with my board action form, I had this totally unscientific calculation based on other license fees we charge, and came up to that amount of $37.50. I don't know if that sounds reasonable, or if you had a different amount in mind, or
If we just rounded it off, 40. That's why I brought it up before was, if it is 40, would 3 events be more reasonable then, since that'd be 120 and the annual fee is 125. So, go the other way, if it's 30, then the 4 works well, so.
I
Just think, with some of the other ones, they're all overboard. So.
I would be happy with 30.
I'm okay with 30.
I think that does all right to cover not even a half hour, probably.
Well, it's so hard to calculate because yes, there's the processing time that goes into processing the license and the background investigation, but then you also have the number of days that the license is good for potential enforcement of problems. So that's why it's so hard to calculate, the temporary versus the annual. But again, I just used those other examples that we had and tried to come up on a number in that same ballpark.
I think 40 would be fine in my mind, just because I don't think it really discourages stuff and just does a little better job covering potential costs. Probably still doesn't cover somebody did get 3 of them, that's basically once a month, you know, for the summer months, in a way you could say. There's some event going on or something.
Well, and frankly, with all the exceptions that we have to the ordinance now, you're probably you're not going to get a whole bunch of applications anyway now, so.
I think the important thing with that discussion in mind is whether or not you're going to change that to 3 or 4 or 4 to 3, you know.
Thirty's fine if people are into that.
35?
Well, to me, like I said, you're not asking for that dollar amount, but we want to make sure if you're going to leave it at, you know, 4 times within a calendar year, that you're at least mindful of those fees when it comes to setting that fees. And so, you know, if the thought is leaving it at 4, you're probably, you know, if you're going to leave the annual at 125, then you're better off leaving that in that $30 to $35 range. If you're looking at adjusting one of those either which way, then that's probably where you want to reconsider whether it's, you know, maybe 3 days or 3 times instead of 4.
This is due at 30, no opinion.
So then just leave it at 4 events, that's all we
Yeah,
need
like I said,
right now.
you know, we'll make that when we get into the fee schedule.
Make a motion to approve as the ordinance is worded right now.
I'll second.
Motion by Steve, second by Chad to approve the first reading of ordinance number 19-809. Any other discussion on it? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Opposed, carried.
Thank you.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Granting franchise to JKMB Properties LLC located at 525 South Grade Road Southeast for the purpose of permitting a parking lot to be placed over and above certain properties located in public right-of-way of public right-of-way. First reading.
All right.
Evening, Kent.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor, Council. Yeah, this is something we discussed a while back as we were developing the South Grade Road Corridor Improvements Project. And there's a couple of drawings in your packet along with the actual ordinance, in essence, the franchise agreement. Thank you. So anyways, here is one of the drawings within the packet. 525 is what most people commonly refer to the Anytime Fitness building. This is Randall Chiropractic right next door there. Obviously, Aspen Dental is to the east there off the page. But anyways, what we did in the end with the new configuration geometrics of the roundabout in that area is we allowed us to address some drainage and some grading match point dynamics in this area by extending their parking lot basically out to the back edge of the new bituminous trail, which is the red hatched area there, the 10-foot wide area. What was built is actually the red. There's some additional line work on here. The old line work there was what was within the plan. So we modified that to give us a little bit more buffer in between the new bituminous pavement edge, which is the crosshatch area there. All of that crosshatched area is within city right-of-way. So that's inside the right-of-way. prior to this, their parking lot basically ended right at the right-of-way line, give or take. And they were left with they had parking stalls in this area, but they were tight, to say the least. And basically what was going on, you could only park there in a couple of stalls immediately north or adjacent to the access point. Because you'd get into them, then you had to back up into the access driveway area, then to turn and get to the other driveway. So we left them with the two access points, driveways per se. We've helped them out by giving them a little bit more blacktop there to utilize that area. In the end, you might have noticed, we have removed all of this bituminous and replaced that with new blacktop. What I alluded to in the packet was there's a trade-off. We didn't have to take all of that area to accomplish what we needed to accomplish from a project standpoint, but we would have ended up with basically a diagonal saw cut there. So it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So we approached the property owners, and they're in essence picking up the cost for that triangle, that additional blacktop. At the next meeting, you'll see a assessment petition and waiver form with respect to that improvement. So, and then that'll coincide with the second reading of this ordinance and adoption of the franchise agreement. I should say this is similar to the Caribou Coffee situation. That drive-through lane on the north side of the property encroaches onto the Century Avenue right away in that area. That's what this agreement mirrors that agreement. With that, I don't know if there's any specific questions with respect to the agreement. Like I said, it's pretty much what we did for Caribou. This is the actual survey drawing, sketch and description of the parcel that's being addressed by this franchise agreement. The legal description of it. So like I said, yeah, this would be the first reading, public hearing. We'll bring it back next meeting, second reading and adoption, along with that special assessment petition and waiver documentation.
Open it up for public comment.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second that.
Motion by Steve, second by Chad to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
The motion to approve.
I will second that.
Motion by Steve, second by Chad to approve first reading of ordinance number 19-805. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Discussion of SITS property deferment assessment.
Mayor and council, included in your council packet was first off a letter that city staff received back in August by Mrs. Sitz, along with a memo follow-up from staff in regards to that request. Might be a couple of you that remember this project. This is in relation to the Harmony River and the extension of the road, or the completion of that road back in 2010 time period. At that time, there was an assessment that was levied for that work. There was a somewhat unique and a special arrangement between the city, the hospital, and the property owner at that time. The hospital had to kind of help make this project move forward. The hospital agreed to pay off that assessment up front with the idea that it would be deferred until 2021, at which point payments would start I guess, being collected by the city, in which the city would turn around and reimburse the hospital for those assessments. Obviously, it's 2019 entering 2020, so we're essentially a year away from those assessments, looking to go outside of deferrals status into active status, of which caused a letter from Mrs. Sitz that came to staff and is now being presented to the council tonight for at least some consideration. We're not asking for an answer, staff is asking for direction tonight. In our conversations with the hospital, it is their desire that they receive payments upon 2021 when this assessment kicks in to gear. So that's something we need to keep in mind, something that obviously needs to be a part of the conversation. If we were to consider the request that's in front of you, if we were to look to defer that to a later or longer period, that payment that's due to the hospital still needs to be addressed one way or the other. There are, I guess, options for the council to consider if that is a desire. I can potentially get into that right now if you like, or if you'd rather have a discussion first on it. Direction from you guys.
I don't want to run through the options.
I mean, ideally, the city would probably pay for that assessment, pay off the hospital. So most likely that would come from our community improvement fund. And then any future payments from Ms. Sitz would come directly to the city, of which we would then turn around and reimburse the community improvement fund for that payoff. If that's a desire of the city. There's really any other probably option, at least that jumps in my mind.
It was really a different setup, and I can't remember why it kind of came this way, and it doesn't really matter, but, we have other properties where they're deferred until development starts, and this one had defined payment start dates, and so I'm okay with having staff try to work out something, some kind of agreement. My concern is, like other deferred assessed properties, is that interest keeps accumulating, and is there some way to mitigate some of that? To have discussions.
On that note, excuse me, Steve, we try to limit our indefinitely deferred, assessments by all means nowadays. You're exactly right. There's some still out there that have the until developed or until a transaction clause, but we try to minimize that, and we also have worked for many years to take a lot of those off the books. Honestly, there were a fair number of older storm sewer related ones, utility related ones that we've just done away with. It's just become unrealistic, or from the city standpoint, city staff standpoint. So just want to make note. I think there's relatively few out there.
Good. And which would make sense. I mean, we know from some of our even recent history, how, and so I'm sure that's why the city went more from that kind of indefinite deferral to something like this that had a set period, so you don't necessarily run into those problems that you forget about it or
Comes up brewing and compounding for. And I see Mrs. Sitz, Hazel is here, and I just want to just look back a little bit, and Hazel, and we had many conversations with Hazel, myself, and Mr. McGraw at the time, and that's really to work through this situation. And Hazel was really a willing party at the end of the day to really ultimately accommodate Harmony River, the hospital, that entity. If Hazel wouldn't have been a willing party in this arrangement, they wouldn't have been able to build there, honestly, on that parcel. So I just want to make note of that. We wanted a time frame assigned to the assessment, like I just mentioned, albeit, we were at that point in time entering kind of the heart of the recession, I would say, so not a whole lot of homes were being built at that point in time, but we weren't too far removed from a fair number of homes being built in the mid-2000s. So, you know, obviously, we're in a different environment now. When that parcel will be developable, I don't, nobody knows, honestly. It, you know, could be 10 years from now, it could be 50 years from now. You know, that might be a farm field for a long time, honestly. It is service, but yeah, so I think it's in the city's best interest, I think, just to acknowledge the situation that was at hand at that point in time, and Hazel's willingness to, you know, to be a partner to accomplish ultimately what the hospital wanted to accomplish.
I'm gonna be optimistic and say that we're gonna continue to have massive growth in the city of Hutchinson in the next 10 years that will be developed, so. But Kent's right, I mean, we're really faced with two options. One is you set another extended timeline or indefinite, and we've talked about how we've kind of gotten away from that, you know, indefinite. I think it's important for us to realize if it's, you know, deferred another 10 years, there's nothing saying that 10 years from now we're not sitting here looking at that same situation. So,
And I think one last thing though, the other question at hand is the interest situation. And I think that maybe goes back. There wasn't a clear set parameter whether interest would be paid or not in the first 10 years. It was clearly set after year 11 started what the situation was with respect to Hazel's or whomever the property owner was at that point in time reimbursing the city and then the hospital. But, you know, the city, like Matt said, paid there's basically $266,000 in principal there. If the city paid the hospital that at this point in time, or a year from now, you know, which is basically when Hazel is on the hook to pay the assessments starting in 2021, I would maybe approach the hospital and say, hey, this is going to be interest-free. And that's just, I think that would be good faith from their standpoint, just to take the principal amount. And we don't even get into the interest conversation at this point in time, because they really did benefit from this arrangement looking back.
yeah, it is, it's a gray area really when it comes to interest from year 2010 to 2021. Especially with a lot of it was tied to development. And so this is not anything that's developed with and there was no previous conversation or perception on what would happen if the city were to, or anybody outside of the city were to simply pay that off without development. I think the interest, at least as I read it, ties to the development aspect of that, or once the 2021 deferral kicks in.
So you're looking for like a 10-year?
Well, I guess, you know, what, I mean, there's some direction. What we're looking for as a staff is direction to where we can start, I guess, looking at an arrangement that would potentially be something that both the city and Ms. Hitz is interested in entering into. Correct, Mark? I mean, if there's a desire for the council to do that, that's great, and staff will, like I said, if you have if your desire is 10 years or 15 or whatever that is, that's, you know, that's where we can start those conversations, so.
I'd say no more than 15, but see what you can work out and talk on the interest part of it. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay with that.
I think that's a good direction for us.
I know you don't want to say, you want to say? Okay.
I think that's a good direction for us to be in conversations with Ms. Hitz on.
Right, nice to see the amount of development going on to the north of there, so if that continues and.
Yeah, and we, you know, I think we've, been around here long enough, you never know. We could have something pop up in the next 5 years, but it's tough to.
They're closing in on you. Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Council.
Review of City of Hutchinson 2019 Pavement Management Report. Mr. Olson?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The pavement management report's been in the council packet. Couple of things to look at on it is the overall condition. This is kind of like a report card you get in school. It really doesn't tell you everything, but it's just a picture of kind of where we're at in time. The grade that we get is a 76, was the grade we had when we did our last physical inventory, which was in 2017. In 2019, we use standard decay curves. The number has dropped to 74, not a big deal. But one thing that we did notice in the report itself and in the data in particular was movement towards more patching and maintenance overlay, and then some mill and overlay type projects rising to the top. And I think what that is indicative of is that we've done seal coating on a regular basis for many, many years. We've utilized the egg oil sealant product, and so we're probably at a point now, and the system is recognizing it, that some of the roads that we need to work on are in a little poorer condition, so that we would need to do some additional patching and maintenance overlay work or a mill overlay type project. So I think that's the biggest picture that gets painted by the data this year. Other factors, always other factors that affect PCI. This past year came in the form of severe weather, and 2019 was probably the worst in anybody's memory with regard to the amount of frost damage that was done this spring. And of course, earlier this year, the council had approved an additional $200,000 for funding of frost damaged streets. For the worst of those, city staff excavated the distressed areas, installed the geotextile fabric, reinstalled the aggregate material, and then contractors, for the most part, paved those areas. We did do preparation of all the reports and all the necessary information for potential, and I underline potential, reimbursement from FEMA and the Homeland Security Emergency Management of Minnesota. We identified costs of repairing the frost damaged streets at about $164,000. And obviously there were more frost damage areas than those, but those represented the worst that would be potentially eligible under the for reimbursement for federal disaster money and state funding as well. The last thing that we've done in that regard is signed, dated, checked all of the information to FEMA and Homeland Security. All of that's in, all of that's been reviewed. You know, blessed on both city side and the staff that work on those type projects. And now the question is, will they be dealing with frost damage on bituminous roadways? Nobody has that answer yet. So I think a lot of it depends on what damage overall looks like. That's the best I can offer you, is maybe, and a definite maybe. So, budget recommendation, There was, in the information, how come I'm not on? What am I missing? Oh, there I am. Okay. This one? Yep. Okay, cool. Okay, from the capital standpoint, you can see that we're very, very close to what the system is recommending for us. You know, we're basically within a little over 1% of what the total is, so I think that's good. The one thing to recognize is that we have assumed an amount of spending that does not affect PCI ratings at just about $380,000. If that number goes up, obviously the amount of money that is available to actually affect the PCI would go down. So just to remember that. Those are things like street lights and trees and streetscape items and those kinds of things, and we estimate those roughly at about 15% of the project cost. So. Where we did see a pretty significant difference was in the maintenance side, and it's indicating a maintenance shortfall of about $340,000, and the majority of that, as you can see, would be for the patch mill overlay projects. Again, I think just by virtue of what we have been doing and the maintenance we have been doing over the past few years, it's indicating that it's, you know, we're going to be running up against some additional work that would need to be done. So that, in total, you know, about 11% is what that ends up being. I think this is the graphic that I pay quite a bit of attention to, and this is the change, percent change from the previous year. What happened to the streets that are in 0 to 35, poor condition? They increased by 19% when you look at it from a mileage perspective, and 21% if you look at it from an area perspective. So you can see that we've had some increase and some pretty significant increase in the amount of mileage and area that's now considered either in poor or marginal condition. And I look like I got I messed up the orange on the bottom. So that, but you can see there's an increase in that, and obviously then there's a decrease in the streets in excellent and good condition that follows that as well. So that's one that we look at. It's still a healthy curve. It's starting to be a little heavy on the left side, but in general, it's still a pretty healthy curve. The next year that we plan to do an actual physical inventory is in 2020, next year. And we typically do those about every 3 years. And I am anticipating that we will see a pretty significant increase again in our average PCI. The reason I say that is if we look historically back at what we've projected and what we've actually come into, those roads that we've sealed and seal coated tend to do better than what the decay curves are. Again, these are standards throughout basically the clientele that use this particular system and those that are in the Minnesota area. So I think we'll do a little bit better than anticipated on those roads. Those are going to be primarily the roads that are in the green and the blue. Good condition roads. We'll not lose as many points, I don't think, as what the computer says we will. So I'm pretty confident we're going to end up in that 75 to 77 range next year. Looking at our 5-year capital plan, we should be able to stay well within that range of 65 to 75. Last year we had polled a number of communities and asked them what their target PCI is. and the average was 70 of those. So we're not out of line with our goal of 65 to 75. So that's the short version of the pavement management. I think, again, it's a tool we've been using for a long time, before me, and I've been here too long, so, you know, so it's been a helpful tool to use and to help Kent and I put together some capital plans. You know, there's other needs always that come up, of course, and we need to always do a little dance at the end to make it all work, but we do keep this in mind. Any questions? Yes, sir.
They did, you know, with the patching and overlay, the maintenance part of it.
Correct, yeah.
Is that something, I think we talked about this before, we were doing some of our own at the parking lot. So
Yes.
is this something that you envision that city staff would do those projects?
Right, I would think that we, you know, provided we have a normal year, if there is ever such a thing, you know, I would anticipate our staff would be doing much the same as we did this year, preparing various surfaces for a contractor to come and do the paving. So we may prepare let's say a block or so. We have some equipment, whether it's a skid steer mounted or wheel loader mounted, that we can mill the surfaces, that we could address any significant distresses, and then have somebody put a nice, because we do not have good paving equipment like that, and so that would be make the most sense, is to utilize the contract for that, so. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about suggesting that we set aside some of the community improvement fund dollars, you know, just as a one-time thing for now.
Sure.
But we've got some other projects kind of looming, so, you know, maybe, but maybe later in the year, I don't know, how much time do you need, you know, if we decided to allocate some to do some of that, even this summer?
Yeah.
Do you need a lot of lead time, or?
I think we would, you know, we'll obviously when the snow starts melting, we'll be able to get a handle on what we're up against and figure out, you know, if we can actually check off some of the projects that we had already identified for this year that we didn't get to. We'll know, and then we'll also know if we would have time for additional ones, and I would suspect by middle of June, we would know the answer to those questions.
Just something to keep in mind, and then if not, possibly the year after.
Sure.
With the ground being so wet, it don't look good, does it?
I'm a little bit spooked out, and you know, one of the things we dealt with last winter was pretty much every snow event that we had started with rain. And if you look out on the radar tonight, it's green before it turns blue. So, you know, it gets me a little nerved up. Hopefully we don't have another winter like that. So, yeah.
One thing I'll just note, and I would encourage, you know, the public, especially with a lot of the comments that we receive, to take a look at this document. I think it does a really good job. It shows that, you know what, we go out on a yearly basis, or at least every 3 years, and we evaluate our streets. That's one thing it notes. Secondly, it notes which ones are public streets. Because a lot of times we have comments on areas that are not the city's responsibility.
Right.
And then thirdly, it does show that we have a plan in place. A lot of the areas that are graded as poor are gonna show up in our 5-year plan.
Correct.
And sometimes it's, you know, if it's not in our 5-year plan, it's in our 10-year plan. And it's working on getting there. And so I think it's just a good document to show to the public that we're aware of the streets. We've got a plan to approach it. And, you know, when we follow up and we follow through on those plans. And obviously there's always that debate on, can you do more? And that's, you know, where the council comes in. But at least we've got a document out there that's good for the public to take a look at.
Yeah, and of those three, there's 3 general areas where we you'll see some addition, a little bit more red than most other places. And really, all three of those areas, we've got projects in the 5-year plan that address a fair number of that. So we're hoping to kind of make that left-hand number get a little bit smaller here in the near future, so.
Yeah, I think we're well situated from a capital improvement plan approach. I guess just one disclaimer, and John puts a lot of work in, this is a huge model, a huge exercise that has a lot of parameters in it. And one of the big one is costs assigned to each respective type of improvement. And I think that's the scary thing right now.
Right.
John's showing historical numbers with respect to project costs, and I think like we've talked before, I think our day of reckoning, I guess, or realism is coming on that front in the construction environment. So I think that's scary looking forward. And it might come, well, we started to notice this year, but I think it's going to come our way next year also. The other thing, and John's exactly right, mill and overlays on roadways, and or just heavy maintenance. And that's something we've done a little bit over the years, thin overlays or full overlays. Lynn Road, that's a full mill and overlay approach that costs a fair amount of money. John will administer thin overlays on a block here, a block there, that we just want to put a Band-Aid on and hopefully get another 5 years. One of them's right out the back door here.
Right.
Yeah, so that we did not too long ago. But the struggle I think we're going to have on that front, we know there's streets with needs, but some of these streets are relatively new. If you look around town, the stretch of Edmonton down there to the east of Menards, basically east of Highway 15, that's a relatively new roadway that's going to need a treatment, more than likely an overlay approach in the not too distant future. Fifth Avenue, going out to Highway 22, South Grade Road to the west of Dale. Those are all roadways that are relatively new that I think it needs a full mill and overlay treatment, but I think we run into a situation where, due to the age of it, can we justify special assessments? And that becomes somewhat of you want to deliver those improvements in a timely manner before the cracks get too wide and the street's too far lost. And then you do a mill and overlay and get a large amount of reflective cracking right away. You're going to get reflective cracking anyways, but it's all about the timing of those improvements. So just want to mention that. I know John and I have talked quite a bit about that. We've been sliding those streets out. They're creeping out now to 21 and 22 and beyond. But yeah, going to come a day we need to address those, and it might not be easy on our pocketbook if assessments are involved.
Great. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Update on proposed 2020 general fund budget, tax levy, and capital improvement plan.
Mayor and Council, just give me a second here. All right, Mayor and Council, thanks. We didn't have the opportunity to necessarily go over the preliminary budget at our last workshop, just kind of with where this fall has been and where we've been at with projects. And so as we look at next week, the end of next week with our truth and taxation hearing that's scheduled for Thursday, December 5th, I want to at least have a little bit of time to present kind of where we're at right now with the proposed budget for 2020. This is an update from the preliminary budget that was established in September. Just make sure we have that conversation in advance of the truth and taxation hearing. So if there's any last minute changes or anything else you'd like for us to look at or touch on before we get to that point, at least you've had the opportunity to kind of see with where we're at in regards to that, like I said, proposed budget and levy. So up on the screen, we have in front of you, you'll notice kind of the middle column there after the 2019 budget is the 2020 preliminary. That was what was presented to the council in September, and what we're calling right now as the 2020 final. And that's obviously what's in front of you tonight for discussion. You'll notice that between revenue and expenses, there's been just over 120,000, just under 121,000 that's been cut from the budget. And right now, we're looking at a 3.7% tax levy increase within the general fund. That's down from 4.5%. And an overall tax levy increase of 2.6%, which is down from 3.1. That was approved in September. And some of this was shifting some of our thoughts on where some of this funding should be coming from. Some of it is, we do a lot of our budget projections based off of trends, and having, a little bit later in the year, seeing where some of our trends are, especially on the revenue side. We'll be able to make some of those adjustments. And then we also met one-on-one with directors just to kind of go through things, if you want to say with a fine-tooth comb, and which allowed us to cut back on some of our projected expenses. So as I noted, the budget's been reduced by about 120,000. Those expense decreases have been somewhat tempered a little bit by adjustments in revenue, which we projected some of those go down. Overall, we're looking at a $40,484 tax reduction from what was approved in the preliminary budget back in September. As I noted, the tax levy increase of 3.7% within the general fund is needed to balance the current budget. That's down from 4.5%. Just a reminder that roughly 1% of the tax levy, of the general fund tax levy increase is due to the open hour tax abatement, which kicks in 2020. And so if you take that out, we're actually looking at about a general fund increase of 2.8. And as I noted, department trend adjustments have been made. And we're still likely going to have some minor budgetary adjustments and impacts between now and when you guys are looking to approve the final budget in December, just because we're in the process of open enrollment, and we'll have those numbers next week, probably. I think it ends this week. End of next week. So just a couple things to keep in mind. Once again, this was the approved preliminary levy that you okayed back in September. That notes the general fund, the tax abatement, and the debt funds, along with the EDA and HRA. Once again, that was at a 3.1%. And what we're looking at now to present to the council in December is a 2.6% increase in our proposed tax levy. Budget's obviously currently balanced. That's what we'll be bringing to the council at your truth and taxation hearing, along with the final approval in December. We always like to show what's that financial impact on the average taxpayer. And so we've included up here what was approved last year. Options 1, which is a 0%, a 2.5. Option 4 was the preliminary tax levy that was approved back in September. You'll know that with the proposed 2.6% tax levy increase, we're still looking at the municipal tax rate. That's once again just the city's portion of going down slightly. Overall, you're looking at a financial impact on a home valued at $166,500, which is closer to the median home value in town. It's about a $43 tax increase. I will note, and if you look at option 1, which if we would propose the 0%, you're still looking at about a $20 tax increase, and that's because of the value increase that we're seeing within the community. That's just the graph up on the screen is just kind of a history going back to 2012. That's when the market credit changed, I guess, if you want to call. And so that's kind of the history of where our tax rate has been. Once again, the tax rate is what gets, and this is, like I said, we could probably spend an hour trying to explain the property tax system in Minnesota. But the tax rate is what gets assigned to residential properties, well, quite frankly, residential, commercial, industrial properties within the community. And that's based off of the value of the community and what we're setting for property tax levies. And you notice that the last several years, that rate has continued to decrease, and there's a proposed minor decrease set for 2020 with this proposed 2.6% tax levy increase. So what this just shows is that the value within the community is increasing at a higher rate of which the property taxes are increasing. That's why the tax rate is going down. So many times we'll hear, well, you're raising the taxes, how can your tax rate go down? That's a part of the formula, is the value, and using that calculation versus where our property tax dollar amount is at. This is just kind of a historical look at going back to 2012 with where our tax levies have been at. And that's looking at both the general, the debt service, and the EDA, HRA. Since 2012, and including what's proposed for 2020, our average property tax increase has been at 1.9% over those last 7 or 8 years. Last year we had a 3% tax levy increase. Like I said, what's in front of you tonight and what's going to be proposed in December is a 2.6% increase. And one of the metrics that we started keeping track of really last year is the price of government. I know the state, federal government uses this. This is something that we've tried to incorporate into the municipal level. And this is just really meant to help guide you guys as obviously elected officials to kind of see where is that price or that cost of government going in relation to the community. This isn't an exact science, but it takes into account what we collect in revenue from the public. So that includes your fees, that includes your property taxes, and then you weigh that against the median income of the overall community. And that's why I say it's not an exact science, because the median income for each individual is not the same. But this gives us, I guess, the best big picture look at the price of government in relation to the overall financial health of the community. And we've seen a steady decline in that cost of government since 2010. Just a couple, and this is just for data for you guys, basically, and for the public too. So this is just a graph that looks at where our general fund and total levy has been at in relation to the growth of the tax base. And so that red line is that growth of the tax base. That's the percent increase in our value that we're seeing from year to year, and how that relates to where we've set both our general fund levy and our total levy. You can see obviously in those years where we saw a decline in our property value, that the council held property taxes either at a flat rate of 0 in the general fund with minor increases in the overall levy. Then as we've seen some of that value increase, we've also seen a little bit of increase, in those property tax rates. I think in the last 5 years, our average tax rate has been about 2.5% increase. So, we've seen a little bit more of the 2.5%, 3% increases versus the first half of the last 10 years, we were kind of more in that 0 to 1%, or 2% overall tax increases. And just, there's a lot of numbers, a lot of lines, and a lot of colors. But just trying, like I said, once again, paint a picture just for you guys to have that ability to take a look at some of these metrics. This is taking a look at our general fund and total levy compared to the consumer price index. We take a look at that when we're establishing wages, but it's something for the councilors to be aware of, and to where our levies have gone in relation to that CPI. I think there's a little bit of correlation there with seeing the CPI decrease. We've also had decreases in our tax levies, and as that CPI has increased, we've seen a little bit more of a desire, if you want to say, to increase our tax levies during that time period, looking back to 2010. The 5-year, we've included for you the 5-year general fund forecast. I've shared this time and time again with the city council. Roughly 70 to 75% of our costs come from wages and benefits. And obviously this is the one thing to be mindful of. That has some concern for us as we look at the next 4 to 5 years ahead of us, is that with the increases in wages and benefits, we've got some concern that you're going to be faced with 5 to 6% tax levy increases if we don't make potential adjustments to how we approach that in the years to come. Now, some of you may say, well, Matt, we've been nowhere near those levels the last several years. I think a couple things to keep in mind, we've seen increases in LGA, we've seen increases in the HUC payment, and some of those aren't gonna be around in the future. It's allowed us to kind of offset some of that. So, you know, I'm simply sharing this with you just to be mindful of and to take into consideration as we look to the future and as we look to establish tax policies from the elected council side of things. You know, as we look at some of those increases in staffing costs, I think it's important to remember that staffing levels have increased over the last 10 years. There was a significant cut in staffing back in 2010. You can see kind of where we were at that 142. You cut that down to 130, all the way down to 126, and now we're back up to really the same level of funding or of staffing of where we were at in 2010. As we've had some demand for more services, as we've seen some of that growth in the community, we've added back some of those staffing that we've lost, and we've had other occurrences where, you know, some of this, we need to keep in mind, we added some hospital security. We're getting reimbursed from the hospital for some of that too. So, you know, those were 4 new employees, and so we just need to be mindful of that. This is kind of more of a snapshot in time, but when we come to budget, we look at full-time equivalent. And that may mean, that's basically taking every employee at 40 hours. Obviously, we have some that work 22 or some that may work 30, but I guess the big thing to note is that, once again, in 2010, we were at roughly about 132 full-time equivalent. And as we look at the 2020 budget, we're still at that level, but you saw we dropped from 132 down to those 120s, 117, 120 level, and we've gradually filled those positions back up over the years, and so that's why we're seeing some of that increase demand and wages and benefits as we move forward.
It is,
I'm
you
sorry.
should note on that, you know, the real changes in the general fund, you know, the enterprise fund, FTEs, numbers,
They remain relatively
flat, yeah,
flat.
yeah.
Yep, you know, and some of that, once again, you've got those 4 security officers that were added, but we've added some, you know, kind of almost across the board, and I think we've added some in recreation, we've added some in police, I think we added 1 in public works, and so we had some changes in the DMV. Some of that, we have to be mindful too of some of these state mandates that have impacted us as well. But you're correct, most of those changes have come within the general fund. Obviously, as we've seen those FTE, that's just kind of gives you an example of what's happened with general fund wages and benefits, and overall wages and benefits are in relation to the number of full-time employees that we're employing. Once again, this is just to point this out, to be mindful of what's coming down the track for us, if you want to say, in the future, and some of the things we're going to be having discussions on, and also just to ensure that we're comfortable as we enter kind of the final stages of the 2020 budget process and what we're looking at adopting. We talked on this a little bit back in September when we looked at LGA. One thing to note is that we've got $168,000 of new LGA money that's coming into us in 2020. Right now, all of that money has been allocated to the general fund. We've had some discussions on potentially shifting some of that to the capital improvement funds, like to kind of, right now we're at about 45, 55%. When you include all of that, 168,000 in the general fund, that becomes more of a 50-50 split between the LGA that's going into the general fund, and that's going into the capital improvement fund. We've laid out some scenarios for you if there's a desire to shift some of that. As I noted, we've cut right now, you know, $40,000 in taxes from the general fund. We're proposing to lower the tax levy. If there's a desire to shift some of that LGA into the capital improvement fund, I guess Andy and I's proposal would then that you maintain the proposed tax levy at that 3.11%. we've got some scenarios there that we need to at least take into account, that if you're gonna be moving that out of the general fund, that's either gonna have to be replaced with some new revenue, which obviously we can't go above the 3.1%, or cuts in within expenses. And even with that being said, we've even talked about shifting some of that undesignated money into both the facility plan, into our miscellaneous maintenance plan, to just, as Kent noted, as we've talked about, we're seeing some of those expenses go up. It's not a significant shift, but it does provide some additional funding into that. So, I'm open for any discussion or direction on kind of LGA before we move forward. Always, I can touch on the last couple of slides and we can go back to that here. Just a couple additional items to be mindful of for 2020. Obviously, we're talking about our own budget, but I think we need to be mindful of what's going on around us. The county proposed a preliminary tax increase of 8.9%. I need to keep that in mind because we're at 2.6%. On top of that, they have approved a county sales tax that's going to be impacting us. We know that we've got the school district referendum that approved, and that'll be impacting the taxpayers in Hutchinson. And then as we look out in 2021, 2022, we're planning on a new police station and the need to finance that as we move forward. So as we kind of just wrap up this update, as I said, as we get ready to jump into the truth and taxation hearing and adoption of the budget for 2020, our September preliminary budget was at a 3.1% tax levy increase. Staff is ready to propose to the council that be reduced down to a 2.6% increase based off of the adjustments that we've made since September. Also, we did include with you an update of the current capital improvement plan. We did have overall cost increase of about $1 million. That was because we had budgeted some money in 2019 for the new police station. As things have transpired, that's got shifted back to 2020. And so we also shifted some of those expected years for when that project would begin. We were looking at 19 and 20. Now we more or less planned for kind of a 2021 construction date. So we've completed the fleet and facility plan. We've delayed some other improvements in the refuse fund, and that dates back to the conversation we had at our previous budget workshop in regards to bringing in a consultant to kind of really look at, that source separated material, and so we wanted to wait off on doing any of those capital improvements till we had a look at it. And there's some potential for some just additional adjustments. We've kind of given the directors to the end of this month to get any last items into us. So a lot of information. Trying to give a kind of an update on what we're looking at as we enter into the Truth and Taxation meeting next week. And so as staff looks to that meeting, are there any changes that council would like to see before then? We obviously still have some time. I think based off of potentially what we may be here at the Truth and Taxation hearing, we may want to consider a budget workshop meeting in early December. But at the very least, I want to at least kind of give you the council idea. That's where we're at as of November 26th.
To clarify, that HSA transition, that's included in here?
That's included in
This
those
is the second year?
Second year of 5.
Okay. And then the fire department was talking about some staffing arrangements just because of the Main Street work that.
Yep, and we tempered that down a little bit after having that meeting, and we thought it was probably a little aggressive on the amount of extra hours they were predicting. There still is some hours. I think they're originally looking at about a $20,000 or $25,000 cost that we've kind of cut back to about a $10,000 cost increase. So those were some of the adjustments that we made as we had the opportunity to sit down with the directors face to face.
Looking forward, do you see it would be an advantage to have the council have a longer session, not even a workshop, but, because it could probably take more with some of the policy, the looking forward stuff. We've got some other big projects that'll be talked about.
Yeah, I know, obviously, we've got the financing of the police station that we need to have a real serious conversation on, and that potentially could impact, even staffing in that. And so, I guess Steve, to answer your question, yes, I think probably more January, February, we need to have a meeting to discuss not only how that's gonna be financed, but how that's gonna impact some of the staffing. There's some areas within the police department that with a new police station, we have to think about. And then obviously you've seen what's potentially ahead of us for employment costs, and I think it's fair for us, we're better off having those conversations in January, February, and March than November. And so I think we need to start having some of those conversations on what the comfortability level of the council is, what the comfortability of the community is for future tax increases or lack thereof, because as we've noted, our biggest expense is staffing.
Well, I know just from my experience when I first was elected mayor, we were having annual 5% levy increases. And I think that one chart you showed, 2010, was the last one. And we started hearing about it. People were coming to the Truth and Taxation. Not just to listen, but voice concern and complaints. So I don't want to we've been doing a great job managing things, but new revenues that we won't be seeing, it's just going to be more important to come to a level and how we're going to manage it and give staff some guidance. So.
Well, to keep our level of service, that's what people always look at. They always, they want the level of service, and it's kind of hard to keep up the service if you don't have the bodies to get out there and do it.
Well, and I think that's some of the serious conversation that we need to have that, quite frankly, we probably haven't had in a long time. There's some services that we provide that I think it's fair to ask that question, should we still be doing that? We've had things change in the last 20 years. I'll throw one out there, the event center. The city got in that business 20 years ago because there wasn't a whole lot of meeting spaces in the community. Since that time, we've seen the winery, the golf course, you see all these barns that are now becoming the meeting spaces, and, is that a service we still should be providing as a community, as our obligation comes to, our debt obligation comes to an end on that? And I'm not saying it needs to go away or we move forward with it, but I think that's a conversation we need to have, which then plays into some of these future staffing costs that we look at. That's one item. Like I said, I'm sure there's other ones too that we need to have.
We do
need to have a conversation with.
We do have some partnerships too with people that, are we better off being on our own, or is it still feasible being in partnerships with them,
But that's
and I'll say January will be year 5 for me. I don't know if we've really had those conversations in the last 5 years on some of those. I think that's a healthy conversation the council should have.
And I agree with you on that. I think that's a conversation we all need.
Like I said, it's tough to do it right now as we're entering
I
the
know.
end of, but in reality, we should start those in January, February. And we know that the issue of financing a police station has to happen, and to me, that those should go hand in hand, because I think that helps with that whole discussion.
Anything else for Matt, for
Financial assistance, did I miss?
Andy?
One that gives me all the numbers.
Must be doing all right. Andy's just sitting there nodding his head, so.
Well, imagine as we talk during the week, so.
Anything else for Matt?
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Resolution number 15111, adopting City of Hutchinson snow removal and ice control policy.
John.
What timing I have. If you look outside now, it's just starting to come down, so.
Be quiet.
This is the reason why it's getting put this on the agenda.
And you think you're gonna get out of here?
Mayor and council, it's been 5 years since we did the last review of the snow and ice control policy, and Public Works staff has been looking at this each and every year, and it's probably time to do some minor changes. Really, a lot of changes can really be boiled down into, some of them are administrative, updating descriptions and titles and terminology, those kinds of things. You know, minor improvements to word order, those sorts of things. Priority routes, one of the things I can tell you is that the priority route system affecting Edmonton Avenue, Lynn Road, and South Grade Road are noted in the policy proposal. And then we also separated out the downtown area as its own area. We added some language to address snow removal in designated overnight parking stalls that are located within municipal lots, that I hope is helpful for everybody to understand a little bit better how that system works. We added some language related to sidewalks, trails, and walkways, specifically for the tiered priority system that we use, and then and hopefully clarify exactly how we do that. One of the things we've dealt with last couple of years is snow disposal sites. Last year we filled up our snow disposal sites. We had to create some new ones. So we just added a little bit of language to address when we do need to do that. South Grade Road, Adams Street, and Bluff Street have all been affected by changes to the county and the county and city street systems. So there's some adjustment there. And then in the operation of road maintenance equipment policy, which is part of that, the snow and ice policy, there were some changes to Minnesota statutes that we had to address. Couple of items of note on the policy itself. You'll note that for staffing operations, we do whatever we can to keep work to 12 hours if at all possible, and within any 24-hour period. And I will do whatever I can to make sure that there's 9 hours between the time when they're off and then they're called next. And that's just purely a safety issue for everybody, just to hopefully get a few winks in between responding to snow and ice. Another item of note is, again, the sidewalk and trail, and then also the Chapter 169 rules, which are the traffic rules. You know, snowplow operators are exempt from those traffic regulations while they're actually doing the work, with the exception of those related to pedestrian safety around schools and anything to do with drug and alcohol related laws. So pursuant to that, we have a policy in place that's added on to the snow and ice to address that, and in particular addresses those activities by contractors and the snow haulers in particular. So that, you know, one thing that we spend a lot of time on with safety training with our own departmental training is making safe choices when you're out there, because the nature of the work, you're going to have to do some things that are counter to what typical traffic does. So we want to make sure that when we're doing that kind of behavior, that we're ultra safe in doing it. One of the things that we're going to do this year and reinstitute from many years ago, you saw the dip in the staffing levels. One of the things that we were able to do years ago that we haven't for the last several is to run a tandem plow route, meaning that there's two trucks together. And as one can imagine, there's let's call the level of respect for one snow plow coming at you is X. The respect of two snowplows coming at you is more than 2x. So the other thing that it allows is the operators can watch one another when they're doing backing operations on the busier roads. They can kind of cover each other and make sure that things are safe behind the other while they need to turn and change directions and things like that. So we're going to try that out again. Our priority route system is set up roughly, nobody should really have to go more than 3 or 4 blocks to get to one of the priority routes. And the idea is that hopefully those are plowed out before people bail out and go to work. Boom, we move into the neighborhoods as people are getting off to work. And then timing wise, we believe that that'll allow us to address those priority routes twice in an 8-hour or 9-hour day. So that's really why we did kind of went back to that idea. Municipal parking lots basically would very much encourage people to get a parking permit. You can go down to the police station, get a parking permit. I highly recommend that everybody that's using the overnight stalls at a municipal lot to do that. Primarily, that gives, because that gives the police department a contact, and there could be some expense avoided if you are able to be contacted and move the vehicles. We usually try to do what we can to not interrupt that use of the overnight stalls. We'll oftentimes go in there with smaller equipment the day after, those kinds of things. But once in a while, there's not much of an option. We need to get that area cleaned up. So then we post signs over the top of the existing overnight designated stalls that allows parking in other parts of the parking lot between 2 and 6 a.m. Go in there, clean it up, pull those signs off, and away you go. So it talks a little bit about that and a little bit more clarity, I think, on the sidewalks, the snow removal, and then also the snow disposal sites. And that's really the main changes. One of the things that we've done, and we'll be doing this as we update the any of our activities that are likely to smash a mailbox, like leaf vacuuming or snow plowing or some of those kinds of things. We have pretty well laid out what the expectations are on a mailbox. If it is struck by a city piece of equipment, yes, we will do what we need to do. The property owner has a few options, whether the city does it or they do it, and there's a maximum set in the fee schedule each year for reimbursement for mailboxes. Mailboxes come in everything from $4 mailboxes to $4,000 mailboxes, so it makes the best sense for us to set here's what we're gonna do and reimburse people. I've had people use every one of the options that we provide, and so we realize that there's different expectations that people have, so we set these different things in place. So last but not least, some maps. The priority route system, I should have chose a different color I see in this one, but But it'd be, if you can kind of see, we've broken it down into three main sections. The orange section is southwest, kind of a purplish color is southeast, and then the pink is the north section. And again, we intend to have 2 operators on these, taken off right away in the morning so that we can get things cleaned up, hopefully in time for people to get to work, and then go into the neighborhoods when people are at work, and then if we need to, we can come back and address those before we go home for the day. So, any questions on snow? Hopefully it's...
Are you ready for tonight?
Probably technically, yes, but I don't know about mentally prepared. Introducing new routes to folks it's a big deal. It takes a little time. First, they got to see if the route that they've been assigned actually works, and then start to make those minor changes over the course of time to be a little bit more efficient. So there's some change that each of the operators is going to have to deal with this year. So, you know, I told them just give it a try first, then we'll adjust as we need to. But I do believe by going to this system that we'll be able to better serve the community, and it will be a safer operation for both the traveling public and the operators. So that was the goal. So.
On the priority route
Yeah.
list, for one is Edmonton Avenue, southwest, southeast from the dead end, I'm sure over by Target, and
Yeah.
then it was Jefferson Street, now it
Right.
says Grant.
Right.
Is it still stopping at Jefferson, or?
No, I will go into Grant and turn around. It's just safer to turn around there. There's
Oh.
less traffic than there is on Jefferson.
Sure.
That's why we changed that.
Okay,
Mhm.
there's that little cul-de-sac.
Correct,
down
yeah,
there, too.
we can go in there and we can have one split one way, one go the other way, get turned around, come back out and go,
Gotcha.
so,
Okay.
yeah, that's the main reason.
On the downtown one,
Mhm.
you know, I thought, okay, Lynn Road to Adams Street, Fifth Avenue to Fifth Avenue North, and it's like, well, there's a whole lot of other roads. At first, I was thinking, why not the other? But it's the area, that's the boundary, right?
Right, that's really the area that, and many of the blocks on those are, there's either no storage or limited storage, so the effort takes longer to do those.
Yeah.
So then by the time, rather than peeling them off to a different route altogether, I just said, let's make a downtown route. So we'll actually have 3 primary snow removal pieces in the, on that, the red portion, the red streets, and then we'll have 2 in the alleys and the parking lots in the downtown area. And again, it really boils down to the fact that there's a lot of area in that 5th to 5th,
Sure.
Lynn to Adams that has limited or no boulevard storage, so.
I guess just from somebody reading it, I thought maybe if
Mhm.
it's just downtown, maybe in parentheses, area between.
Yeah, right, sure, I can do that, yep.
With the overnight parking,
Mhm.
the last paragraph says, once posted with the temporary signs, parking restrictions and overnight stalls begin immediately.
Mhm.
But you might post them before 10 a.m. So
Correct.
what if somebody's already parking there and doesn't move?
If
Till,
till later, that's
Yeah.
fine, that's okay.
Okay.
And again, that's why we recommend the permit piece, because obviously at 10 o'clock, I'm putting up the signs, I'm gonna go home, get a nap, and I'll be back early the next morning. So we're not gonna contact the police department till we get in, you know, roughly that 1:30, 2 o'clock timeframe to say, hey, we got, you know, 5 cars left in there.
okay. was
So,
just
the idea is that there's that 10 o'clock in the morning until, you know, basically 2 o'clock in the morning time frame to get the cars out of there, so.
Okay.
Mhm.
When it said once posted, the restrictions begin immediately.
Right.
I didn't know if somebody might get, the police aren't sure who's parking, were they there to begin with, or were they not?
Right.
But really, the enforcement's only after that.
After that, 2 o'clock
Yeah,
AM.
okay.
Yep.
On the trails and walkways, I
Mhm.
was wondering if it's worth mentioning that, you know, the snow isn't removed from the loose line trail. If
Sure can.
People have
Yeah.
questions about that, why aren't you doing that one?
Right.
Well, it's state and
Okay.
snowmobiling.
Yep. I can certainly add that. Thank you.
And then, connection, or, yeah, and in Appendix A, the declaration, you know, we always say 7 AM, you know, or 2 AM to 7 AM, right?
Midnight
Or
to 7.
Midnight to
Yep.
7.
Yep.
But, no, there's been times people, well, the plow already came by, but they got towed anyway. But I'm not saying to change it, but would it be good to add something that this means it doesn't matter if
I see
the
what you're
plow's
saying.
already come by, you know,
It
it's
wouldn't
these
hurt.
times.
It
and-
wouldn't hurt.
Because
Yeah.
you might have to go back.
Right,
or, you know,
definitely.
so-
So I can certainly add something to that effect.
And-
Certainly in the notice. We'll put that in the notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think, well, two other ones. Under notifications,
Mm-hmm.
don't have our Facebook page, you have the
Oh,
city website, so maybe in addition at FGH or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or right up,
I can just add something to the effect of social media
yeah,
outlets or whatever.
sure, there you go. There's one other one. Complaints or questions?
Mhm.
Should it say like to contact City Hall first? It sounds like, and then have a phone number? It just, I forget where is that?
Oh, for the review?
No, or if somebody had a question or complaint, sorry, I can't find it.
And they generally do call public.
Yeah, typically, during the business hours, they'll get a hold of us and.
Yeah, okay, it's requests for services and complaints.
Okay.
Will be taken during normal working hours, not able to be answered by staff, will be forwarded to the Public Works Department. So
Right.
it sounds like there's like City Hall first and then
Yeah.
Public Works?
Well,
or-
it comes from wherever it comes from.
Generally, they call
Sometimes
City
the
Hall,
police
we
department.
pass them to Public
Yeah,
Works.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So during the normal business hours, it'll come to Public Works anyway, because then whether I'm physically there or not, you know, that we'll have staff there
yeah,
that can respond. We will have someone available, obviously, we got a couple water, wastewater guys that are here during the day. So when we go home and something comes up before, you know, during a normal working day, I'll usually try and contact one of those two guys, be able to address it. If not, you know, we've got some part-time folks that can help with that as well. Otherwise, I
Okay.
usually end up and run in and do it myself, so.
it's just a question of
Yep,
who to call, or maybe have a phone
Yeah.
number on there or something.
sure. And that's in the area where this whole snow removal in the website, so,
Okay.
yeah, so.
That's
But
all.
no real huge changes, I don't think, just some clarifying things that hopefully, you know, make it a little bit easier for everybody and understand. A living document, like I say, we look through this fine tooth comb every year. The plan is to come to you guys probably once every 5 years or so and say, hey, it's time to make some modifications to the policy, so.
So a notice is going out, or has to, like in the water bill, or?
As far as this, the snow emergency,
Yeah.
no, he did not. Something we could look at, if we want to do that. We've had it in place for close to 10 years.
It's only,
know.
again, if there's new people.
New people, right. I have had several questions from folks who are new residents that call me and say, how does this work?
I think John, we need to post something
Yeah,
on our Facebook.
Sure.
Probably get that last year around, just to know.
right, just usually, a little bit closer to Christmas time. Because off the record and turn all the microphones off and everything, we're gonna be a little more higher level of service until the Christmas time is over. We typically have done that, we tend to keep doing that. And then I know PD has done kind of warnings, shots across the bow early on in the process. Again, we recognize that there's Christmas shopping and holiday get-togethers and all those things happening, for the next month and a half here. So, we really want to focus in and make sure we're doing everything we can to help folks out during that period of time. And then we can kind of slide into more normal functioning after the holiday, so.
Everybody appreciates.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
And I'm gonna go home because I'm gonna get up in about, I don't know, a little while and look out the window, see if it's time to go.
The latest forecast, still that 7 to 11? Have you heard?
Your guess is as good as anybody else's, and
Maybe
if
you
you
were
look at,
watching.
yeah, I was watching and I have been keeping an eye on it and look at several different sources, and I don't believe any of them. I don't think it's gonna be as big as the initial discussions were, but we shall see. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Mayor, Council, we should either approve the resolution with those changes, or John bring that back with those.
Make a motion to approve it, just make some minor modifications.
I'll second.
Absolutely.
Motion by Steve, second by Mary to approve the resolution. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. Federal aid project memorandum for Truck Highway 722 and Montana Street crossing improvement.
Yes, Mayor and Council, project we've discussed several times over the years. We were allocated federal aid dollars a while back here, and now we're doing basically the first step in that federal aid process, which is the preparation of the project memorandum. Fairly just a boilerplate document. There's a framework, you make your entries into the document, you describe the project, you assign a cost estimation. You have to go out to several agencies to get their letters of approval. If you looked in the packet at the draft, there are, I think, 3 of them that remain to be secured, and that's pretty typical. Some of these agencies take their time for whatever reasons, and we're not expecting, this is a relatively small project, the crossing at Highway 7 and Montana Street, without much excavation involved. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of we need to get the draft into MnDOT. The deadline is December 2nd coming up here. And then if you notice the approximate construction dates, we did allude to delivering this project next spring. That at one point was a hope. That's come and gone after we came up the learning curve with respect to signal system, mast arms, and poles out on the South Grade Road project. The lead time, well, not so much the lead time, the actual delivery time frame from the time of our order back in mid-April ended up being just over 6 months. And talking to Milliburn's sales rep for our region here, he's saying that's not going to get any better going into next year. So just a lot of work in front of those guys with not enough people to do it is what it boils down to in that industry. So with that in mind, we're going to look at getting through the federal aid process, getting the memo approved ultimately in the next couple of months, And then we hope to go out for bids the fall of 2020 to set ourselves up for construction early 2021. Well, I shouldn't say early, probably June, July, after school's out. And that'll build in about an 8-month time frame for a contractor then to order those signal system materials within the framework of the contract. The city won't have to pre-order those materials like we had to for South Grade Road. So with that, yeah, nothing much else to add. Just a formality, bringing this in front of council. We will, attach your approval, your blessing of this draft document to all the documentation that's associated with it in the end when it's finalized.
Make a motion to approve?
Second.
Motion by Chad, second by Steve to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. Governance, we have Public Arts Commission minutes from October 9th, 2019. Hutchinson Housing and Redevelopment Authority Board minutes from October 15th, 2019. City of Hutchinson Financial Report and Investment Reports for October 2019. Public Library Board minutes from August 26, 2019. Chief Gifferson, you have anything for us tonight?
Actually, I do have a couple things. Just probably more for people that, you want me up here? For people that live along the river, Hutchinson Police, Hutchinson Fire, and McLeod County Sheriff's Office were out again today doing a search of the riverbanks before the snowstorm. And so if they happen to see somebody in their backyard or something like that, it was us. So I just wanted to get that out there. Also, just a reminder, again, more for probably the people viewing at home, snow emergencies, if they're declared, our intent is to cite any violators, but there will not be any towing the first go-around as we've traditionally done in the past. So I know John alluded to that earlier, and that's our version of a warning, I guess, is no towing that first go-round. And I think that's it, except for happy Thanksgiving to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chief. Kent?
Couple of things, leaf vacuuming pretty much is coming to an end with the weather, but it came to an end per our time frame approach yesterday. So yeah, people who have leaves out on the curb lines, the boulevards and such should gather them and dispose of them on their own terms is what it boils down to at this point.
Or they could be pushed back into the yards, but.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they might end up there.
Yeah, here they go.
Wait for a windy
Yeah,
day.
well, the breeze today might have gotten them anyways, but yeah. Otherwise, yeah, Matt mentioned earlier we pulled the MnDOT Highway 15 cooperative agreement council item. Yeah, the MnDOT's central office is going through that agreement. What was arrived at between myself, MnDOT district staff up in Wilmer, and the consultant, SEH, with a fine-tooth comb. The district staff in Wilmer is looking out for us and really trying to defend our logic, our approach, our reasoning as we developed that agreement, those understandings. Albeit what I'm being told though is yeah, the cooperative agreement office downtown has I guess, a certain tone to it right now is what it boils down to. So we'll be looking forward to seeing that back from them. Then I'll be meeting with district staff to fully understand what's been arrived at. That's contrary to what we arrived at over the last many months. And then, like Matt mentioned, I think we're looking at January before we have that draft agreement in front of us and a good understanding and justification of it from my standpoint. I was hoping we were gonna get to where we needed to be a heck of a lot sooner, and I know SEH and MnDOT district staff felt the same way or had the same hope, but yeah, not gonna be the case. And unfortunately, I think what's being arrived at downtown is not favorable to us from a cost sharing standpoint either, so.
We were talking earlier, and you mentioned, Kent, that the legislature actually passed a bill, a law, a couple of years ago that kind of guided MnDOT to work with cities and counties more closely, so.
Yeah, I think it, yeah, you're exactly right, Steve. And and what they did at that point in time, they, in essence, the legislature directed MnDOT to be a little nicer to cities and counties. Well, it was kind of twofold. They created a more in-depth policy, but, you know, when you do that, you take out some of the discretion that can be arrived at, you know, from district to district, project to project and such, you know. Yeah, some things were favorable to the locals, the cities and counties, but making things more black and white from MnDOT's standpoint, well, I think from their standpoint was a good thing, but maybe not so much a good thing to us as people outside of the district, outside of the project, review these agreements, these understandings, and apply this policy in a black and white manner. So, yeah, wait and see. Otherwise, quickly, I just want to mention this because I know that a few people have noticed it, and we're not happy with the wear course bituminous paving in a lot of the areas out on South Grade Road. The contractor's well aware of the issue. There's some workmanship there. There's some potential materials issues. We're in a wait and see status at this point where it's going to go through the winter. Obviously, we know we've chronicled where we're at right now, what areas are bad. We did that right after the paving. We did that just last week again, and it had even evolved to the worst in that month, or just short of a month time frame. So contractor's well aware of it. We do have a fair amount of retainage in hand. We've written the general contractor to that effect, that we're gonna be holding that retainage. That applies to some of the paving work, the seeding, the sodding, other items. So at the end of the day, you know, we still haven't paid out almost $100,000 on that project, so we're still well positioned. If there is a serious pavement issue out there, we still have plenty of leverage going into next year. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Mark?
Nothing else tonight.
Dave, let's start with you tonight.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just gonna wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and be well aware what the weather's doing.
All right. Steve?
Just an update, it had come forward a month ago, maybe apply for a called Artists on Main Street. That was through, used to be the Main Street Association's Board for the Arts. Got notified that they had a lot of communities apply for that. They were not selected. Typically you have 2 or 3 that are picked. But they did offer a year's membership in the Main Street Network program, which goes into a lot of, you know, the historic preservation part of it. They have classes and things on ways to help revitalize, strengthen downtown, so it's a free one-year membership. So good to sign up for and see what it might be. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Chad?
I don't have anything else other than have a happy Thanksgiving.
Mary?
Well, Kent answered one of my questions, but another question, Kent, that I get from people out who are driving around town is, why are our man covers set so low? You know, if you go down the street, people are all driving like this so that they're not dipping in and out of them. So,
Yeah. Well, the contractor, when they pay, we want them low to a
Right.
certain degree, otherwise snowplows catch them, and that's not enjoyable from a snowplow
Right.
driver's standpoint or an equipment standpoint by any means. So they're granted a certain amount of tolerance to be low after they're adjusted prior to final paving. And it's not an exact science, that's the other thing, you know, there's variability there, and, you know, it's tough to do, and really, the same guys paving aren't the same guys adjusting the manholes typically, so that's part of the issue. And really, nobody's figured out a good way to do it, especially with respect to bituminous pavement. It's easier to do for concrete when you're setting forms and tighter grades. But blacktop can vary cross slope wise, and yeah, they should be within, you know, tolerance is basically a half inch, but that's tough to do. They should be within an inch to begin with. But the other thing that happens when winter comes is when things freeze, the roadway freezes, the pavement goes up, the manhole casting due to the depth of the structure stays where it's at. So then it gets even deeper. You understand? And then when spring comes and it thaws, then the pavement comes back down. So, and then the other thing, we've done a lot of reconstructing roadways and narrowed them over the last few years or the last decade. You know, so we're not controlling where the manholes are. You're stuck where they're at. You understand what I'm saying? If you go like on School Road, you know, it's a good example, especially in the southbound lane, you know, those manholes ended up in a less than ideal spot. We try to adjust the curb lines as much as possible, i.e. the driving lanes, to address that, but then you get into trouble with driveway grades, and you're trying to fit a new trail in the boulevard, and, you know, it's just a huge balancing act. So really, at the end of the day, the manholes end up being where they're gonna be, you know. On Main Street, you know, it's a new roadway, new utilities, you know, the sewer manholes are gonna be right down the center line, you know, and that's where ideally you want them. Storm sewer manholes will be, if there are any, will be within the center of a driving lane, you know, so a vehicle can bridge them. But if anybody can figure out how to get a perfect adjustment on a manhole structure in a bituminous roadway, will be very wealthy. You know, that's what it boils down to, because this is an issue everywhere, yeah.
Well, I knew you could answer that question, so thank you for that. I don't have anything else other than to wish everybody a blessed Thanksgiving and travel safely.
Matt?
One thing I'd ask the council to consider tonight actually is, I sent an email out on this, but to set a workshop. This is on emergency management training for Wednesday, December 4th at 7 a.m. We'll be meeting at the EOC Center. I'd sent a kind of email out, kind of heard back from a majority of you yesterday and today, and so we look to have that. She says it'll probably be an hour.
What
But that's
time?
Wednesday, December 4th at 7 a.m.
All right.
at the EOC.
Seems really early.
Yep.
Come on, Chad, you're like me, you got a half hour of work in already.
Donuts, speaker
No,
five.
no.
You, that's that training.
I would ask the council to consider setting that.
Make that a motion.
Second.
Motion by Steve, second by Mary to set the emergency management meeting, training. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And that's
Thanks.
next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday already, yeah. Quick reminder, city offices will be closed tomorrow, or Thursday, I'm sorry, Thursday and Friday for Thanksgiving. And then, as I noted earlier, truth and taxation hearing is a week from Thursday, December 5th at 6 p.m.
EOT?
For those. Thanksgiving, everyone, too.
Down where? He just wrote down where.
Well, you know, Thanksgiving's coming up Thursday, and, I know everybody has everything, a lot of things to complain about, but, just take time out and find something that you're thankful for. Cause we're very lucky to be living in this country. So everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Adjournment's in order.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Chad, second by Mary to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Go home, go to. Family. Word, it says.
The outdoor industry doesn't start before 9 a.m.